Hello, everyone. As you enter the room, thanks for making the time to join us this evening. My name is Michael. I'm the events coordinator and publicist at Annie Bloom's Books. For those of you who aren't familiar with the store, we're located in Southwest Portland, Oregon, in the heart of Multnomah Village, where we've been around for 43 years now. We're open on weekdays from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. and weekends 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. I'm going to admit somebody else. Oh, Mary. Hi, Mary. Welcome. Our website is always open. You can shop at annieblooms.com day or night. We offer curbside pickup, in-store pickup, local delivery, and various shipping options. We have some great events coming up. Saturday is Independent Bookstore Day all day long. We're going to have a raffle for a couple of gift cards, some fun little giveaways, and some exclusive Independent Bookstore Day items, a mug and a keychain and a tote bag. Let's see, on Thursday, May 5th at 7 p.m., local author and publishing star Laura Stanfill will be reading from her debut novel, Singing Lessons for the Stylish Canary, about a young instrument maker in 17th century France. And Laura will be in conversation with fellow Portland author Kathleen Lane. We're going to be talking about anxiety on the page and as writers. On Tuesday, May 10th, Portland middle grade author Jen Reese will be launching her second novel, another second novel launch, Every Bird a Prince, in which a girl's quest to save a forest kingdom is intertwined with her exploration of identity. Tonight, we have local author Emmeline Duncan / Kelly Garrett and the live stream launch of Double Shot Death. It's her second ground rules mystery. We'll admit another person here.
Put it up there so everybody can see.
Oh yeah, there you go. Kelly is going to be in conversation with fellow Portland mystery author Angela M. Sanders. We'll have a Q&A at the end, so feel free to type questions into the chat and I'll be happy to read them, folks. Or you can click on the little hand icon that's in the reactions menu down there at the bottom of the screen. If you want to ask a question live, we'll invite you to do so. Let me tell you about Double Shot Death. Sage Kaplan is taking her Portland coffee cart on the road to a sustainable music festival, but murder is an unwanted special guest. At Campathon, an annual eco-friendly festival held on a farm outside of Portland, fans celebrate the Pacific Northwest music scene in quintessential PDX style, with gourmet food carts, reusable utensils, and lots of coffee. How else to get through 3 days of nonstop entertainment? I myself took up the coffee habit during a music festival. So yeah, you need your coffee. Sage has scored a coveted place for her ground rules coffee cart, thanks to her newish boyfriend, Bax, who's friendly with Maya, one of the musicians performing. The festivities begin with a stream of customers, friends, and acquaintances stopping by for ground rules world-class blends, expertly brewed by Sage and her newest barista. But there are tensions between Maya and her former bandmates, who are on the cusp of making it big, and with Ian, the band's manager. When Sage stumbles upon Ian's dead body in the nearby woods, his hand still clutching one of her coffee mugs, it's clear that someone's grudge boiled over into murder. Can Sage work out who's responsible before another innocent life fades out and the curtain falls on Campathon and maybe her own future for good? Emmeline Duncan is the Portland, Oregon of the Ground Rules Mystery Series, as well as YA novels written under the name Kelly Garrett. She is a 2020 Oregon Literary Fellow, a board member of the Northwest chapter of the Mystery Writers of America, and co-organizer of the Friends of Mysteries Bloody Thursday lecture series. She's also a member of Sisters in Crime, Willamette Writers, and SCBWI. Visit her online at emmelineDuncan.com, Instagram and Facebook as @writer Emmeline Duncan, and on Twitter as Duncan Emmeline. We also have with us Angela M. Sanders, the author of the best-selling Joanna Hayworth Vintage Clothing Mysteries, The Which Way, that's Which, W-I-T-C-H, Which Way Librarian Mystery Series, The Booster Club Capers, and The Kite Shop Mysteries, written under the name Clover Tate. In addition to cozy mysteries, she regularly writes articles on food, vintage clothing, personalities, and perfume for Portland Monthly, Now Smell This, the French perfume magazine Nez, and various food magazines. A former congressional investigator, she now writes full-time and is a member of Novelists Inc., International Thriller Writers, and Sisters in Crime. Angela has 2 cats, one of whom is Black, of course, a witch's freckle in her left eye, and learn to read tarot cards from a pagan priestess. She lives in Portland, Oregon, and can be found online at angelamsanders.com. Everybody, welcome Kelly and Angie.
Well, Kelly, so should I just jump right in? I'm thinking that I'm going to ask you some questions about your books.
Go for it.
But is there something you want to say right away? Okay, first of all, I want to say that Annie Blooms is a terrific resource in Portland, and I hope that you are all ordering books from them. If you, including Kelly / Emmeline's latest book and her first book, if you haven't already got that, I have a book coming out at the end of July, Witch and Famous, which I actually think is the best of the series. Just got a great Kirkus review. If you order any of my other books from Annie Blooms, then I'll give you a free copy of the advanced review copy of this book. I just want to put that out there to encourage sales at Annie Blooms. And then Michael, you'll let me know, right? Okay, great. Okay, so first of all, at the heart of any good mystery, I think, is the protagonist. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about Sage.
Well, one important aspect of Sage's backstory is that her mother is a very notorious grifter. If you've seen the TV show Leverage, I compare her mother to an evil Sophie Devereaux. And that has really, affected a lot of Sage's life. She definitely feels a sense of responsibility for some of the victims of her mother's crimes, especially because she was used in some of the scams as a small child when she didn't know what was going on. And that having the mother that they do has also affected her older brother, Jackson, who is an attorney who specializes in child advocacy and wants to speak up for people that have, much harder time for us to hear their voice. And Sage also, her father is a police officer and she has a very strong sense of justice. But she also, having learned as a child, how to cold read people and to do a few things, she could be a really good grifter if she wanted to be, but she's way too principled. But she'll use sometimes those skills, both just to read people for fun when they come to the cart, but it also gives her a lot of insight into who's telling the truth. And it, helps her solve the murders that she does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's super cool. I think we all wish we had a few sort of, grifterish type skills just to be able to kind of read people's minds. So Sage is a series character. Double Shot Death is the second book in the series. And as an author, one challenge that I've always looked at is how do you, all the writing books say, build your protagonist needs to have some sort of a character arc, over the course of the book, and the character needs to change in some way, needs to have some misbelief that is corrected. But when we're talking about a series, you can't have the character, continually, pumping out character arcs. So how do you deal with that with Sage? Do you have a long-term character arc? What are you doing about that?
I don't have a really specific plan but I don't have a plan of where she's gonna end up, but I have a general idea. And if you look at the first book, the first line is how someday Sage, hopes she'll feel like she's a grown-up. And so one thing that I think I'm showing over the course of the books is that, she is fully going to be a very functional adult by the end, even if she doesn't always realize it, because who really thinks oh, hey, look at me, I am so responsible. Maybe some people do. I'm jealous of them. And also, my one thing is going to show is her business growing, her life, evolving along with everything that's happened to her, and with as she makes business decisions, the other decisions she makes in her life will be equally important.
Well, she has a boyfriend now, so the whole relationship thing will be coming around. Well, so you kind of briefly compared Sage to yourself when you said that. You said, well, I hope that she becomes an adult. I hope that I do. So people ask me this all the time. How much of you do you think is in Sage?
Oh no, Sage is very much her own individual. I think any character we write is, you'll see little tiny bits and pieces of the author, at least the characters we like. But no, to me, she's definitely her own person. We have really small things in common. We're both coffee purists. We don't really like sweet lattes, for example. There might be small things like that, but the decisions she makes and the reactions she makes, I think, are are very different from me. And I did put a lot of time into like what makes her tick, like how has her background affected her present? Because I think everyone, the decisions you made 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and the things that happen that you couldn't control do inform someone's present. And so when I do put Sage into tricky situations, I also do think of like, how is she going to react based off of like what she's gone through? And I truly want to make her feel like, even in my own head, like a person that makes her own unique decisions to the situation she finds herself in.
Yeah. So in other words, that's not you.
No.
I'm sure you are, whoever your whatever your childhood made you to. Okay, so then related to a series, why did you decide to write a series instead of a standalone?
Well, big reason because this book does fall into the cozy area. You don't really see standalone cozy novels. They're almost always in series. And I did create Sage with the ability to have hopefully a very long running series. In a lot of decisions I made with the food cart, I mean, she has a cart, which she can move once, the rail yard becomes the food cart pod of death. She can move her cart somewhere else.
Right, when she's killed off everybody.
Right, she can find some new, and I also, like, in her life, tried to create a lot of space for the storylines to go in different directions. And it's actually really fun being set in Portland because there are a lot of neighborhoods and there's a lot of events I could use within the storylines.
Yeah, that's true. You could be sort of like Cara Black as with Paris and move around neighborhood by neighborhood each book because you have a cart. Yeah, I didn't think about that. All right, let's get my glasses here. We have some actual questions rather than just winging it here. Okay. I understand why you chose the setting of Portland because you are in Portland, but were you tempted at all to make up a fake town?
I have played with that with other manuscripts, but I really wanted to set it in Portland. And even though I did create, some kind of unique, so like the rail yard doesn't exist, it is based off of multiple pods. I did want to show that the Portland as the city that I know and love. And I thought it would just be a really fun spot to place a cozy mystery. Although I was also very careful to create a small community within the bigger Portland. And then in the first book, that's because most of the action is at the rail yard, which is like its own small little town, like the food cart pod. The second book, being at the music festival, is also its own smaller community with its own set of norms. And so I tried to kind of create a little bit of small town ambiance in the bigger city. But no, I think this particular story needed to be told in a city.
Have you heard from any readers who have questioned you about Portland? Like, I've never heard of the rail yard,
I have had people email me and they're like, I want to go to this place. Where is it? And I'm like, I'm sorry, the rail yard, the Tav, a lot of the main places are made up.
It's in my imagination. You can't go there.
Or a few people have been like, oh, is like the rail yard, is it this food cart pod or that food cart pod? And I'm like, that's kind of cool. It's actually, made up. And someone else, like I've had two different people email me like, oh, is the Tav this bar? And it's funny because the both of them, I'm like, one, I need to visit that bar because it made someone think of the Tav. And two, no, it's completely, made up.
Success then in what you're doing. So, you said that cozies are mostly in series, which is so true. But why did you decide to write a cozy? I mean, when you were conceiving an idea of writing, even about a coffee cart, you could have, see, here's my cat's tail right there. You could have, you didn't have to make it cozy.
I initially wrote a draft that was a little darker, that would have been more definitely soft boiled or maybe kind of on like the edge of like maybe like of noir, but it just didn't work with the story that I wanted to tell. A cozy just fit the actual story a lot better. I did take some of the elements out. I mean, actually scrapped like 30,000 words and started over. But once I did that, it felt the story felt like that's how it was supposed to be told.
Yeah. Well, what was it that wasn't working, do you think?
Well, I think part of it is the voice of Sage just works better. And I mean, maybe if I had really sat down and cleaned up a few elements, I could have made it a darker mystery.
Mhm.
I think that just wasn't where it was meant to be. Like I have other ideas that I think could be, nothing that I write will ever be super dark because that's just not my style. But I do
Mhm.
have like a few like novel ideas that could be standalones that would fit into a more general mystery category, but just not this particular one. Like the coffee cart, the character really lend themselves well to a cozy.
And to a series too.
Yeah.
I mean, really. Yeah, I can see that. Okay, so now we're talking about coffee. So what kind of coffee do you drink? I mean, like, what's your daily coffee routine?
I'm very much a pour over fan. And so I pretty much every day make my morning pour over. I tend to mix it up between a few local roasters. Whenever I travel, if I see like a micro roaster, I almost always buy a bag of beans. I order a lot from Extracto in Portland because they currently deliver to my doorstep.
Mhm.
But it's just like a basic pour over. I mean, sometimes if I go out, I might get an oat milk latte, but I mean, a purist. I really just like a good basic pour over.
So do you put anything in it to whiten it?
Uh, I
Any oat
either drink
milk
it black or with oat milk,
and no sugar?
no sugar.
Okay, here's an important question. What is the difference between a pour over and regular drip? You know, like a Melita cone drip or Chemex.
Well, you know what's funny is I actually went someplace a while back and it was pre-pandemic now that I think about it, and they had an automatic pour over and it was basically a 1 cup coffee maker.
Yeah, like a
Um,
camping coffee maker or
it
something.
wasn't even that because it was electric. And I've actually read there are some like machines that are replicating like the pour over process. And
Uh-huh.
it's really funny because I mean, because making a pour over by hand is a relatively laborious thing to do, especially in like a coffee shop where you want things to be quick. But the biggest thing with a pour over is there's a couple style of cones. I like the Kalita filter. There's also one that's Kalita with a K. There's also Melita with an M. That's
Yeah.
also a really well-known cone. And usually you should like ideally, grind the beans fresh. Then you put a specific weight in the cone. And then ideally, again, you use like a gooseneck kettle, which is a kettle with like a long, slender spout. And then you very slowly like brew it by you doing this like a circular motion. And so it should take like 2 minutes, 3 minutes for the water to fully go through the beans. And if you're doing it well, you actually base it on weight. You put everything on a small scale. And so when the scale hits a certain number of ounces, that's all the water that your coffee is going to need.
Uh-huh. That just sounds so scientific and it doesn't sound like a beautiful, intuitive experience.
I mean, when I make it at home, I don't necessarily I don't weigh it at this point. Like I can kind of eyeball,
Uh-huh.
right? Like, I mean, I do measure out the scoops of coffee, but the water, I have a pretty good sense. And, and maybe if I was going to charge someone like $5 for that cup of coffee, I would be a lot more particular.
Yeah. So that brings up the question of research. So when you are researching this, I mean, obviously, just for the people here, the process that Kelly just described, Emmeline just described, is basically in the first chapter of Double Shot Death, down to the filter's name. So in doing all your research and like in this traveling, the one that goes to Campathon is in a horse trailer, the traveling coffee cart. And I'm trying to figure out like exactly how that's all set up, which is kind of, but how did you do this research and how did you learn so much about coffee carts?
I would like to know the horse trailer. I've actually seen some really cool horse trailer coffee or drink carts online. I've seen some that are like used like weddings and catered events.
Uh-huh.
And I purposely chose like a smaller cart. It's Groundholes in the book. It's their second cart. They have their main one at the road at the rail yard. And then they acquired a second cart from someone who'd set it up as a coffee station, hated it, and sold it to them for a good value. So it's their way of expanding their business a little bit. As far as the coffee research, a few different things. There are some really good books on the history of coffee. Uncommon Grounds is a great one. There's a little book of coffee law. And then I've also, I've played around like roasting my own beans. I don't really want to get into it as a serious hobby, but it was fun to try. I have at least 10 different ways to make coffee at my house. So I play around a lot at home. And then when I go out, I mean, one reason that's really nice to be in Oregon is because there are so many like small roasters and they're almost all really happy if they have time to talk about what they're doing. So, if you walk into a coffee shop, if it's a slow day and you order a pour over, you can chat with the barista about what he or she is doing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a big deal. I mean, of course, if they're slammed, you're not going to want to
Yeah.
ask 20 questions because that would be obnoxious. But if they have the time, most people love to talk about what they're doing. Same thing, I've walked into a few places when they've been roasting coffee, and they're always completely happy to talk about what they're doing, again, as long as they're not being run off their feet at that moment.
What about the cart part of it though? I mean, did you just hang out in different food pods and?
Yeah, well, I got the initial idea of this coffee cart when there used to be a food cart pod not just down the street from my house, and Ole Latte, who they're currently in downtown Portland, they were in that pod, and it was really fun. That's when I had this really gregarious black lab who loved that coffee cart with his whole heart, because they gave him a treat every time we went there. And so if we
Mind
went,
of a dog, God love him.
exactly, they would like know, they to this day, like if I went and saw Todd, he would talk about how he always knew that Connor, my dog, and I were on our way, because Connor would start barking like 2 blocks away of like, get the treats ready. He was so excited. And he would go and he would like, the window was a little tall, but he would stand on his back feet with his paws on the counter and just be like, I'm ready for my treat. And I got to know Todd a little bit. He's actually, in the first book, I talk about suspended coffees, and that's actually where I learned about them from. His coffee cart, I think, still has a suspended coffee board. And I talked to him a lot. Because that pod was a little slow, which is one of the reasons it no longer exists. And I got to know a couple of the carts pretty well. And again, people, if you show honest interest in what someone loves, people will almost always talk about it.
Yeah.
And then I didn't think like, I'm going to use all this in a mystery. I just enjoyed chatting with them, and I thought it was very interesting.
Yeah.
And then when I got serious about writing the book, there's a lot of great, even like blogs out there, like, there's like Google, how do you start a coffee cart? And there's like blogs out there where people talk about like every single like thing you would need to like, to buy a car, and how the basics you would need to like essentially furnish it, and even like permits and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so that's coffee, but how about murder? How do you research murder?
It's funny. A part of it, I think, is just having read so many murder mysteries over the course of my life. And then I do have like a forensics 101 book that's written by a cardiologist, actually. No, it's Forensics for Dummies. It's actually written by D.P. Lyle, who is a cardiologist and a mystery writer. And that's a great resource. And I have a few other kind of books about how to like investigate murders that are written like for writers. And and then I listened to like the Writers Detective Agency, which is a podcast put on by a police officer who likes to talk about what he does. I have a few people that I can email questions, like a friend but like we haven't really seen her since the pandemic, but like a friend that was a former public defender who I could ask like random questions of, and she would always answer them.
So one benefit of writing cozy too is I find people aren't super sticklers for procedure. I mean, you could have the sheriff or the policeman do all kinds of stuff I had one who was a cross dresser, and
And I also purposely don't do a deep dive into police procedure. I make sure if I do mention something that it's accurate. One thing too, like a woman I used to play soccer with is a police officer, and she walked me through like, when there's a crime scene, like what do like the responding officers do, and how does all of that work, when it's like roped off, and who's allowed in, and how all of that should happen, and so I use like those little bits of information, but I try to minimize sort of the police involvement, and have my sleuth solve the mystery based off of her own ingenuity and what she notices, and what she can tell, like there's something wrong here, like someone's not telling the truth, and works through it that way.
Right, with her skills that she learned from her mom.
Yes.
So I see that in the people here, there are a handful of writers. And so I wonder if you would talk about your writing process. Like, do you write every day? Are you a real stickler for habit? I mean, how does that work for you?
When I'm seriously drafting a novel, I usually set a goal of 1,000 words a day. For a while, I had a goal of 2,000, but then I found if I only wrote like 1,800, it would sort of feel like a failure. But then if I set a goal of 1,000 and I wrote 1,800, it was inspiring, and it's literally the same number of words. And so, but then on a day, if it's like a real struggle for whatever reason, 1,000 words is very doable. So it does really helps me keep my momentum going. And yeah, when I'm seriously writing a book, pretty much every day, although I will take an occasional day off and, get away from a house, get away from screens, go for a hike or drive out to the beach or do something, and then I'll probably still be making notes all day, but I try to focus on something that's not just like my laptop.
So is that every day then for the most part, unless you're making a trip, like 7 days a week that you do?
When I'm seriously drafting a book, if it's kind of between manuscripts, I might kind of fuss around and like figure out what I should write next. And I still write a little bit, but I'm not putting myself to like the grindstone of meeting a specific goal. And if I finish like a manuscript, I might give myself a little time off and be like, unless I really want to write, and I might, read a bit more, do a few other things.
Mm-hmm. And so do you write in the morning? Are you nighttime writer? Does it matter?
I actually find myself really mixing it up, just depending upon the time. Some days like I really want to get going in the morning. Sometimes in the week I might be going to the gym or doing something that I like to prioritize in the morning, and then I write in the afternoon. I do also like writing in the evenings, and sometimes after 9 o'clock is like a surprisingly productive time. Like sometimes what would maybe take me 3 hours to write at like 1 p.m. takes me like 30 minutes at 9, and I have no idea why that happens.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's kind of good to know though. So you really write pretty much all day. Okay, so do you write in coffee shops? Well, they probably haven't been able to until recently.
That was for me the unfortunate thing about the pandemic, or one thing I discovered about myself during the pandemic is how much I rely on working in coffee shops to be productive, because I really like getting out of the house. And it's really funny because a lot of times, I end up putting like my headphones on and I maybe play like music lightly, but I just find getting out so much more effective. And I used to organize like a shut up and write that met at a local coffee shop on Wednesday mornings. I had friends that I met up with once or twice a week, depending upon like the group. And those are always my like incredibly productive days. And so not having that was definitely a shock. And there was a while kind of pre-Omicron where I did a little bit of coffee shop writing, and it was so nice. Because again, I would even shockingly sit down and like 1,000 words would flow quickly. And so yeah, I miss writing in coffee shops so much. That's like the number one thing for me will be being able to go out again. And it's pretty hilarious. Like I would meet up with friends and we would all put on our headphones and like ignore each other. But it's a still weird social meetup that I also miss.
It's still that connection. I know. Isn't it funny? It's like you want to be alone, but you want to have a little connection too.
Well, I think too, with a lot of like with writer friends, is we sit down and it is a good place to get feedback or advice, like not specifically on like writing, but just, because a lot of like writer friends that also have had like books out, and we can talk about experiences, and so that kind of 10 minutes at the beginning was really valuable.
Yeah, that's true. Well, so now for the big question, which is, do you plot, or do you plot a lot? Do you kind of plot? Or you not plot at all? Where are you on that spectrum?
I always seen myself in the middle of the spectrum. I tend to know where the novel starts, and I tend to know the logic of why, because let's say it's a murder mystery. I know the logic of like why the murder happened, and then when writing, like I figure out some of the red herrings with some of the other characters. But the interesting thing about writing a series is that when I have to turn in a synopsis ahead of time for approval from my editor, and he's made it clear I can make changes to the synopsis as long as it still feels like the same book. Like when I sent him the synopsis for book 2 set at Campathon, I could change like who died or who the killer was. I just couldn't suddenly have it, oh, she's on a cruise to Alaska and it's no longer coffee, she's working as a bartender on a cruise ship. Like that wouldn't fly. But I could change small details. But I spent, but having written a synopsis, I had a much stronger roadmap writing the novel than I had in the past, which is interesting because it's basically some of the discovery work you would do as a pantser, you do while writing like a significant synopsis. Although that being said, my synopsis aren't nearly as intense. Like I've met people that write 20 to 50 page synopsis, and mine are like 4 or 5.
Yeah, and that even to me sounds kind of long. And I consider myself to be a little bit of a plotter. So when you are laying out then your ideas for the books, do you have a system for that? Like, do you have a special notepad? Do you have like, here's the whiteboard that I often use?
Sometimes I'll have like a notebook that I'll jot ideas down in, but for me, using Scrivener is huge. So I'll create a Scrivener, file, and Scrivener is a software program that is perfect for writing long documents. You could use it for a thesis if you wanted. it's great for novels because you sort of write things in scenes and then you can compile them in chapters, and it can help you print an outline and all kinds of fun stuff. And then I've seen with writing in Scrivener is you can start, like if you have an idea for like a scene that you need coming up, you can create the chapter, and you can create the scene within it, and you can make a note of what happens and then go back and write where you want.
I'm a big Scrivener fan too. I feel like we should get a cut of their sales coming up or something. But one of the things that I like about it is that right hand pane where you can put notes in. So you can go back and say, you know, the dog isn't here yet, or it's, you know, snowing or something like that to help keep track of stuff. And then when you go back for a revision, you know what to add in.
And if I'm really on top of my game and the little index cards on the side, I'll write what day it's happening in. Like,
Yeah.
oh, this is the, you know, the first Monday, the second Monday, first being within the story. And you can also write in, if you know, if you're actually paying attention, like what clues are found in that chapter and like what like major red herrings or like what characters were introduced.
It's super helpful. I know some people, you know, either Scrivener works for you or it doesn't, but it definitely works for me.
And I definitely know I think it's one of the software programs, if you put the time in to learn it. And the fun thing, it has a ton of functionality. I know I don't use everything that it offers, but I found what really works for me.
Well, so at 1,000 words a day, it seems like you'd have a first draft in maybe 3 months or less, you know, giving yourself a little time. How long does it take you to write a book, like to get to the end where you feel like it's revised, it's good, it's ready to turn into the editor?
You know, it depends. Like I've definitely written them in the 2 to 3 months. I definitely was writing Double Shot Death was one of the slowest books I've ever written, but you know, during pandemic, because it was harder to focus, and that was probably more like 5 to 6 months of writing, you know, and I did like revision and sent it to my agent who gave me, you know, really good notes, and then, you know, revised again.
Yeah. So that's not ridiculous. Because you've had a year between books, is it?
Yeah, I requested to have a year instead of some cozies come out every 9 months, and that felt a little bit too fast for me. And I'm really not knowing that the pandemic was going to hit, I'm really glad I asked for a year.
Yeah, give yourself a little bit of space. You know, I know you've done lots of interviews like this, and I wonder if there's any questions that you wish that you would be asked, like things that you just feel like you want to share with readers or writers that just people never get to.
You know, not really. And I think part of the reason though that I can say that is because I've been like a moderator panelist a couple times, and so I've gotten to write the questions. So there's nothing like really specific that I felt like I've never gotten to mention. I mean, there's been a few times where I've been like a panel and I'm like, oh, I totally, like, for example, I was at Malice Domestic last weekend, and after I gave an answer, I realized like, oh, I should have also mentioned how, you know, like her childhood was also had an impact on her brother in his own unique way because they had the same mother. And I'm like, that would have like really fit in with the point that I made, but oh well.
Right. Sometimes you can't do that. You know, that brings to another point, which I could have brought up earlier when we were talking about series. What advice would you have to, like, I have some strong opinions about series and about being careful when you write that first book of the series about what you're really getting yourself into, because you're committing yourself, you know, through however many books you end up writing in that series. And I wonder what would you tell somebody who said, all right, I'm going to write a series?
I would tell them to read Crocodile on the Sandbank by Elizabeth Peters, because she has talked about how she wrote herself into a huge corner because she wrote it as a standalone. And it's, you know, that's the Amelia Peabody series. And Amelia goes to Egypt and she meets this Englishman, Emerson, and they have a really hilarious relationship. It's like Victorian Egyptology, you know, and they're excavating, you know, some sites. And because she thought it was a standalone, she had the little ending where it's like a year or two later, Amelia's pregnant looking down at their excavation. And then she realized when it turned into a series, because she'd made her pregnant within like, you know, within a year of marriage and all these different things, that she suddenly had to deal with those for a long time. And so I would say, don't try to write a sort of like epigraph that like solves the rest of the person's life, because you're gonna probably hate it.
Right. So now, right, Amelia has to tote around that kid all the time. And then the romantic subplot's already blown its wad. So, but that was a good series though.
It was a good series, but I would say, like I would say, I actually don't mind characters like not having the like long running romance, because I find it. I mean, I've read some series where I got a little bit annoyed, where I'm like, you don't need so many like love triangles can be really good when done well, but if they're still going after 15 books, it's probably obnoxious.
Yeah, like Ranger and what's his name? And,
Right.
yeah.
And like one of my favorite cozy series, Donna Andrews, Meg, they're the bird themed. I just forgot Meg's last name in the books. And she's like a blacksmith who you meet the love interest in the first book, and eventually they get married, and like eventually they have twins. And there's like, it's funny, there's one entire book of like the character Meg pregnant with twins, that she never leaves the house. She falls asleep in different rooms and still solves a murder mystery that like without ever going outside. But I one thing I like about that series is that she doesn't have the continual like romantic tension,
Uh-huh.
which can work really well. But then, of course, there's other series where they let that linger, or they play with it more, that are also done extremely well. So it really depends on where you want the focus of your book to be.
Mm-hmm. I think one thing, just if I add my own 2 cents in here, if you're going to write a series, give your protagonists brothers and sisters. Like, I think you were smart to give Sage a brother who's sort of, share some of her background and concerns and is a close relationship, because you can build on all that stuff in future books. And I think a lot of people don't think about the family or the community that they're tossing their person into.
I think, and also showing that they have a strong friend network,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because one kind of trope in a cozy is someone, they get like usually dumped by their cheating fiance the same week that they like inherit a house from the great aunt that they
Or a knitting shop.
never met, or knitting shop. Yeah, they inherit something. And it's funny when it's like a relative, they like, I remember meeting them as a child, but I haven't seen them since.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're put in an entirely new situation. And that can work really well as for world building, because the character is experiencing everything new along with the reader.
Mm-hmm.
But then you have to try to create those friends and that network, right, that add a lot of value to the book and can be really helpful for investigating or having resources,
or sparking new crimes because they have families or friends or backgrounds or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Okay, let's go back to the list here. What have we got? All right, here is a deep question. For me, there's usually a reason a book says, write me. Like the main character gets in your head and demands you tell her story. I usually find the reason ties in the emotional heart of the story, and it's the one element of the novel I wouldn't change. What is the emotional heart of your story?
See, that's a fun question because I actually wrote it for a different panel.
Okay, you better have a good answer then.
Thank you. Yeah, I said thank you. I should say yes. So hopefully I have a good answer. Well, so for me, a really key part was Sage having a grifter as a mom, and the sort of the advantages that gives her, as well as the trauma and the sense of guilt, because that sense of guilt is one reason why she's going to keep getting involved in all the scrapes she's going to find herself in.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives her the skills to actually get out of those scrapes and to bring justice to the situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so one thing, like when this novel first went out on submission, a couple places, even editors that liked it, it was too edgy for their cozy imprints because of elements like that. And that was such a key element that I would never be willing to change that element. There's other things I would have absolutely no problem altering, but that has always been a key part of Sage's story.
I'm glad you kept it. Yeah, I think it makes all the difference.
And I should be clear, no one asked me to take that out, but it was the thing that like I knew I would have never changed.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's see, maybe you wrote some of these other fine questions here that we can ask. Oh yeah, well, this is a question I want to ask you anyway. So what do you like to read?
I tend to read really widely. I have always loved cozy mysteries, so of course that's part of my reading diet. I read harder mysteries as well. Like Jane Casey is an author I'm always telling people they should telling people she should like pick up one of her books. She writes a police procedural series about a female detective in the Metropolitan Police in the UK, and she's like just a phenomenal writer. On a sentence level, her storylines are fantastic. I read a lot of fantasy, like where fantasy and mystery meet is a sweet spot for me of stuff that I love to pick up.
Who would be an example of that?
Well, I really like Simon R. Green. He has an Ishmael Jones series. The first is The Dark Side of the Road, and it's basically if you took an English countryside, like a country manor mystery, and then threw like science fiction and horror into it, and like maybe everyone in the story die except for the narrator dies horribly, or maybe no one does. Maybe the answer has like a science fiction sort of resolution, or maybe it doesn't. You never know. And they're just really fun because of that. I read The Last Mile in Sunder City last year by Luke Arnold. That was a favorite. And that is if you took like a hard-boiled PI novel written by someone who understands all of the PI tropes and then put it in a high fantasy world where there had been magic, but like if you think of magic as like a tap running through the world, the tap had been broken. And so anyone that was magical was suddenly now like slowly dying instead of, living forever.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go I'm going to pick one more question, and then I'm hoping people will submit some questions in the chat that you can answer. Yeah, do you read while you are writing? Because in talking to different authors, I've heard like I read while I write, and I think I even ramp up my reading more while I'm writing. But I know some people like Ellie Alexander will, while she's writing mysteries, will only read science fiction. So
I do still read while I write. I might avoid reading like similar mysteries, right? I might end up picking something that is like, maybe on the fantasy spectrum or something else. But sometimes I still read mysteries. But I read a lot when I'm writing, but a lot of times when I'm really focused, I might not read as much, but it's because I'm so focused in the story that I'm writing that I spend more time writing than I do reading. But no, I always have a book going. Like I can't imagine not reading for, while writing for a few months. Like that would kind of diminish, right, life if I did that.
It would, because think of how much time you spend writing. I'm writing every day. That would mean no reading. That would be a terrible punishment. Sure. Whenever I pick up a book, I say, well, professional development. Good too. So let's see if there's some questions in. Michael, are you going to help us?
Yeah, you bet. Cheryl Scarborough has one. Your MC is a classic millennial. What made you choose her age?
I wanted to create a character that where a lot of life was still going to happen, right? If you write a character that, let's say, is 60 and in a cozy, maybe she was just like widowed or something like that. She has a lot of experience that you can base the story on, but she's already like made a lot of her decisions. Creating someone that was 27, and starting her own business, like she still has a lot of life to experience, especially someone that hasn't been married and stuff like that. And so it just created a lot of potential directions to go with her character. And it also made the story feel made it feel pretty, fresh and hopefully a little unique.
I liked it how you're talking about her character development. Her character arc is going to be just like kind of, that 20-something coming of age sort of thing where you start to like really feel like a grown up, if you ever do, but so, yeah, seems like a good choice. Yeah. It did feel fresh. Well done.
That's great.
Yeah, you feel free to type questions in the chat. You can also go down that reactions menu and there's a little raise hand icon. You can click that if you want to come on screen.
So do you have a special, I see there's a question coming here, but I'll toss this out here quick. Do you have a special outfit that you wear when you're writing? Do you have like your special mug, your magic slippers or anything?
Not really. A lot of times, well, I frequently have a water bottle like this, and it's less because I really love them and more because my cat can't stick her paws in it as long as I keep the lid on. She loves to steal water from me. But yeah, I don't necessarily have a ton of rituals. I know some people, sometimes I might listen to like a certain song or two and it changes by the book just to like kind of get myself in the mood. But yeah, it's funny. I know like a lot of people would have a lot more like kind of like strict rituals than me. I'm just more like, is it time to write? Okay, sit down and let's go.
Do you have a song or two for this particular one then for Double Shot Death?
I'm trying to remember if I did. Yeah, I did listen to and it's funny, I've completely forgotten the name of it, and I even quote it in the novel because it's a song long out of copyright. I wouldn't even know who wrote it because it's hundreds of years old. And it's funny, I can like almost see the lyrics in my mind, but I just can't quite bring it into view
What
because
some people might not know is that you generally turn in your manuscript a year before it comes out. So Kelly probably turned this in sometime last spring, like spring of
Mhm.
2021.
yeah, like I haven't really, yeah, like in March of like 2021. It's been a long time, relatively long time, especially when you've written other books since then. And it's sort of funny because when people ask you like, why did you make this decision? Sometimes you have to stop and be like, why did I? I had a reason.
Yeah. Why did you buy a Snickers bar 2 years ago? I don't know. Okay, a question from Megan. How do you come up with a book/idea that no one has written before?
No, to be honest, you're probably never going to think of an idea that no one has written before. It's all about how do you tell the story in a unique way that's going to feel fresh. So one thing you could do is if you're going to write a romance, romance has a lot of tropes that are very important and a few that can't be broken, right? A category romance is never going to have an unhappy ending. The happy ever after has to happen. But that journey to getting the happy ever after is where you're going to have fun. And that's where your book is going to shine and be unique. And it's the same thing with the cozy mystery. I mean, honestly, have you ever picked up a cozy and thought like, is the main character going to solve this at the end? Or is it going to be a lasting question, right? The reader has faith, like you're going to come up with an answer to that question, but it's making the journey feel unique. And so learning the tropes of the category you write in is huge. So you know how to twist the tropes or play with them in a way that's not going to feel like every book that came before.
Well, and the one thing is too, is that you are your own person. I am my own person. No one can write and describe something, tell something, perceive something exactly like we can. So every writer has their own voice. And I think that always makes the book feel a little bit fresh, hopefully.
Yeah, and I would say you have your own voice. It's just, and then making sure that you don't accidentally fall into patterns you've seen before. And that's where reading a lot can help a lot. Just if you recognize like, oh, this happens like, there's a trope in a lot of cozy mysteries that the love interest is a police officer, right? So maybe if you wanted to use that, you would find a different way to approach it than a way that's been used often in the past.
Because that way the amateur sleuth can have some insight from the professional police.
Yeah, that's a huge reason why people have the police officer like love interest. And a lot of times they're like, he's the detective or the police chief of the small town. And exactly, it's so they get information that the sleuth would otherwise not have access to, which is why when writing, like purposely like avoiding that trope, it's having to figure out ways around it, whether it's they don't need that information to solve or they get it in some other way.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Taylor asks, apart from this amazing cozy series, do you have another genre you want to try to dive into?
Maybe. I'm definitely focused on cozies at the moment. I have a few ideas that I do. Well, for example, I have a good friend and I are working on a graphic novel that's sort of a fantasy noir, but it's not really truly noir because I don't think I could actually write a true noir. My favorite definition of noir is your main character starts out screwed and ends up screweder. And I just tend to have too much like hope in my books, but it has like sort of like that light fantasy edge with like solving mysteries. And I really, really hope we manage to sell it. And maybe someday I'll try writing like maybe like a fantasy, but I don't know that it fits my skill set, even though I do love to read them.
Do you know, related to that, is there a book 3? Are you working on the next one in the series?
Oh yeah, book 3 is going to come out in 2023 and the title is going to be Flat White Fatality.
And is that about this time of year?
Yep, should be spring of 2023.
Okay, love it.
And then hopefully there will be more, but one quote that I love is that writing is an art, but publishing is a business. And so, I'll find out at some point if the publisher wants to pick up more, and fingers crossed they do. but we'll wait and see.
That's the contract for now, is through the next book.
Yeah, the contract is for 3.
Yeah.
And I said, I really hope we sign for more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And all of you being here actually helps, right? Because when people buy the book, that helps the publisher be like, oh yeah, let's, keep writing that series because people are buying it.
That sounds like it's a cue to me to put another link in there to remind people to click on that and buy the book from Annie Blooms. And you'll come down and sign them if they do, right?
Yes, of course.
There you go.
Happily
So,
sign
hey.
them.
Well,
Do you have another cozy series in the works? Asks Paula.
I have a few ideas in the work, including one of a couple of chapters written that I put aside when I was writing while writing Flat White Fatality. And so, yeah, I mean, I have like 4 or 5 different like series ideas that I could get into, but I'm also deciding if I really want to try to write more than one series a year, or if I want to work on some standalones. That way it's just one series that I have to do, and then hopefully some but those wouldn't be cozy. So there's a lot of questions in there.
But
I
it
see that-
gives you some variety, which is nice, though.
Yeah. And I see that Claudia Carpenter has a question asking, being that the series is a bit more edgy, do you see this as a direction for more cozy writers? And I think, yeah, in some ways, I think there will always be the kind of cozies we love that are truly really cozy. And I mean this in a good way. Like I think Angie's series is like very cozy, meeting the traditional cozy elements of the minimal violence and the charming, quirky small town and all of those. And I don't think those will ever go away. But yeah, I think there is also a market for cozies that are pushing the boundaries a little bit more. They keep ultimately to a lot of the same rules, where they don't, with like with the minimal violence and the lack of language. But no, I think there will be some that are sort of a little more grounded in reality without losing that kind of hope at the end.
Nice.
I think that unless there's more questions, maybe that wraps us up. What do you think, Kelly?
Yeah, I think this was a good panel, and thank you, Angie, for being here. And
You
thank
are
you.
welcome. I just want to remind people that if you want to order one of my books through Annie Blooms, you get a free copy of the next book coming out if you're a cozy fan, as just a way to support Annie Blooms, because I'm really glad that they're here and I want them to be here for another 42 years or whatever it was.
Thank you.
Oh, and everyone, if you haven't pre-ordered from Annie Blooms yet, I did leave a few extra swag packs when I signed books earlier today. And so while supplies last, you can get your very own Ground Rules mystery candle and a few other little things.
Cool. Extra incentives from both authors. All right. Thank you guys so much. And thanks to everyone who's attended and to everyone who's saying, yes, they're going to get their books from Annie Blooms. Thanks, everyone, and have a really good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.